Deeper than the ocean and wider than the sea is the grace of the Savior for sinners like me. Sent from the Father, and it thrills my soul just to feel and to know that His blood makes me whole. His grace reaches me. Yes, His grace reaches me, and 'twill last through eternity. Now I'm under His control, and I'm happy in my soul. Just to know that His grace reaches me. Higher than the mountains and brighter than the sun, it was offered at Calvary for everyone. Greatest of treasures, and it's mine today. Though my sins were as scarlet, He has washed them away. His grace reaches me. Yes, His grace reaches me, and 'twill last through eternity. Now I'm under His control, and I'm happy in my soul. Just to know that His grace reaches me.
Chapter 28 of 1 Samuel today. And I'm going to do something that I don't normally do. I'm going to read this because you need to get in your minds the details of the story, at least get an outline of the story, because we're talking about Saul's visit to the authorized version says witch at Endor. Happily, the revised version says the medium at Endor, which I think is more accurate. So 1 Samuel chapter 28. In those days the Philistines gathered their forces for war to fight against Israel. And Achish said to David, "Understand that you and your men are to go out with me in the army." David said to Achish, "Very well, you shall know what your servant can do." And Achish said to David, "Very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life." Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him, and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had put the mediums and the wizards out of the land. So the Philistines assembled and came and encamped at Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel, and they encamped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams, or by Urim, or by prophets. Then Saul said to his servants, "Seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her." And his servants said to him, "Behold, there is a medium at Endor." So Saul disguised himself and put on other garments, and went, he and 2 men with him. They came to the woman by night. And he said, "Divine for me by a spirit, and bring up for me whomsoever I shall name to you." The woman said to him, "Surely you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the wizard from the land. Why then are you laying a snare for my life to bring about my death?" But Saul swore to her by the Lord, "As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing." Then the woman said, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" He said, "Bring up Samuel for me." When the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice, and the woman said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." The king said to her, "Have no fear. What do you see?" The woman said to Saul, "I see a god coming up out of the earth." He said to her, "What is his appearance?" And she said, "An old man is coming up, and he's wrapped in a robe." And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed his face to the ground and did obeisance. Then Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Saul answered, "I'm in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me, and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have summoned you to tell me what I shall do." And Samuel said, "Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek, therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your son shall be with me. The Lord will give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines." Then Saul fell at once full length upon the ground, filled with fear because of the words of Samuel. And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten nothing all day and all night. And the woman came to Saul, and when she saw that he was terrified, she said to him, "Behold, your handmaid has hearkened to you. I have taken my life in my hand, and have hearkened to what you have said to me. Now therefore you also hearken to your handmaid. Let me set a morsel of bread before you, and eat, that you may have strength when you go on your way." He refused and said, "I will not eat." But his servants together with the woman urged him, and he hearkened to their words. So he arose from the earth and sat upon the bed. Now the woman had a fatted calf in the house, and she quickly killed it, and took flour and kneaded it, and baked unleavened bread of it. And she put it before Saul and his servants, and they ate. And they rose and went away that night. Now, I continued right to the end of the chapter, reading the last little bit about Saul being urged to eat by the woman, because I want you to see that this woman must not have been altogether a bad woman. She was a medium, obviously, but there was something about Saul's condition that actually touched her heart, so she behaved in a very kindly way towards the king. I think it's important to bear this in mind when you're trying to sum up this woman's character, this woman's position in this story. Now, the story itself of the medium at Endor is one that has fascinated Bible students all down the ages, and I suppose it's very doubtful if we'll ever reach a conclusion that will satisfy everybody. The circumstances we've already seen. David has left Saul, he's a fugitive. The prophet Samuel is dead, and the king finds no more consolation or comfort there. God is not answering by Urim and Thummim, because the genuine Urim and Thummim has been taken by Abiathar the priest, who's gone with David. So Saul in very dire straits, with the Philistines no longer on the edge of his territory, but actually right in the very heart of the plain of Jezreel, in strength, ready to attack. He's nowhere to turn to, nobody to go to. And in his desperate mental condition, he takes this unprecedented step for a king of Israel of seeking a spiritist, a medium. Now, as I say, it's been a fascinating story. It must have fascinated you as we read it. And certainly a variety of explanations have been proposed. First of all, we ought maybe to think about the question, did Samuel really appear? And if he did, was he called up by the medium? Or was there some other explanation? Assuming that somebody did speak to Samuel, was it a demon or an evil spirit, maybe pretending to be Samuel? And that raises the question, doesn't it, too? Was there actually any appearance at all? Or was it trickery and deception on the part of this medium? And of course, mediums are noted for their ability to produce all kinds of stage effects if they want to. Or was it a delusion produced by the medium? That is, did she see through Saul's disguise and just sort of play him along? She knew how desperate the man was. Everybody in the nation must have known it. Is it possible that she knew that he desperately wanted to contact Samuel, and so she played him along and pretended that she saw and heard Samuel? Now, these are some of the ideas. Let's think about this delusion here. Let's take the last one first. There are some people who would dismiss it entirely as delusion. They say nothing supernatural at all happened at Endor that day. The woman simply played Samuel along the whole time, and the whole business was a sham and a fraud, because mediums simply have no power to get in touch with anybody, and all the so-called messages are simply deceptions. Now, this is the view that's taken by a good number of modern scholars. But it is a relatively modern view, and it has to be said that it's a modern view. It was certainly never taken by the early Christian writers. The chief argument is that God would not allow a medium to do something that he'd already forbidden in Israel. And you know very well there are so many passages in the Old Testament, in the earlier books of the Old Testament, the books of the law, that forbid the use of mediums, the sorcerers, those who have familiar spirits, enchanters, and all the rest of it. Because these were the pagan religions, the pagan religious rites and ceremonies of the Canaanites, the early occupiers of the land. And so they say, well, God wouldn't allow a medium to do something that he'd already expressly forbidden. But they say, one can see that knowing how King Saul had persecuted the mediums, people like herself, this woman was glad of an opportunity of taking a very bitter revenge on him and making a fool of him in this way. Well, personally, I don't believe that first argument is very strong. I don't think it follows that because God had forbidden the use of mediums and spirits, that he himself would not send a message. And secondly, I think that other little bit of the explanation dismisses the story far too easily, far too readily. I think there's more to it than that. Now, according to that explanation, as I say, nothing miraculous happened at all. It was just deception and just trickery. And I suppose we might say there are many people today who take the same attitude towards Spiritism. Now, I don't say that Spiritism is just one big deception, because I don't believe that you'd find so many passages in the Old Testament where God expressly and solemnly and seriously condemns Spiritism and orders that mediums and spiritists be put to death if it was simply a sham, if it didn't. The Bible doesn't waste its time fighting bogies, fighting frauds. So there must be something in it. I'm not denying there's a lot of deception, and I'm not denying that a lot of people, seeing it as a source of income, have climbed onto the bandwagon. But, if we as Christians believe in a world that is a spiritual world, we, above anybody else, ought to concede the possibility of the existence of both good and evil spirits. We have good and evil spirits walking about in human bodies today. So I wouldn't, as a Christian, deny the existence of a world beyond this world. And I wouldn't deny that it might be possible under certain circumstances for some people to get in touch with spirits, but I believe they're evil spirits. But we'll come on to this later. The second explanation suggests that something actually happened. The woman did hear and see something. But it wasn't Samuel, but it was an evil spirit pretending to be Samuel. And I might also say that this was the popular view among the reformers. For example, Martin Luther and John Calvin and others. Luther called the appearance a mere spectre from the devil. And he argued, and I think rightly, that since the souls of the faithful are in the keeping of God, it was not in the power of the medium to call back the spirit of Samuel. And Calvin adds to this, it was certainly not Samuel, for God would never have allowed his subject, the prophet, to become the victim of such diabolical conjuring. God would not allow his servant, the prophet, I should have said, to become the victim of such diabolical conjuring. So these two men hold the same view. They accept that there are evil spirits and diabolical spirits, and they think that this woman was able to contact an evil spirit which pretended to be Samuel. Now the third view. There is still the belief that this was some kind of manifestation of Samuel. And by the way, this is the view that is taken, and has been taken by Jewish teachers, by the rabbis, the doctors of the law, all down the ages. And it certainly is the early Christian view. And it's still the view of some people today. They hold that this view is reasonable because, you read that story and it would lead you to the conclusion that Samuel in some form did appear and was seen by the woman. Notice, and I want to point this out, the story doesn't say that Saul saw anything. Did you notice that? He said to the woman, "What do you see?" And she described Samuel's dress. "I see an old man coming up with a robe or a mantle." This I think, and I can understand that some people would say, well, this just shows she's putting it on. Everybody knew the familiar dress of Samuel, the mantle of the prophet. And all she had to do was to say, "I see an old man coming up in a mantle," and that would instantly put the picture in Saul's mind that it was Samuel. And she allowed the king to draw his own conclusion. This is what some people say, and I admit that it's reasonable enough. But such a view overlooks the fact that the passage says in verse 12 that the woman was terrified. She cried out with a loud voice when she saw Samuel, and she said, "Why hast thou deceived me, thou art Saul?" Now, it was obvious the woman saw something, and she was alarmed at what she saw. It's even possible that she thought that this now was a trap for her, that another witch hunt was being instigated, and she'd fallen into the trap and showed herself to be a medium, and therefore she could expect the death penalty. Now the question does remain, though, assuming that something happened, and that Samuel did appear, that there was this kind of manifestation, who caused it? Was it the woman? Was it the woman's powers that did it? Or was it God? Was it from good, or was it from the devil, in other words? Well, personally, I take the view that something did happen. I don't believe that the woman made it happen. I believe that God used her. And if there's any objection to God making use of a medium in this way, then I would ask you to remember that God used Balaam, the false prophet, to deliver some very striking prophecies, some of the finest prophecies of the Old Testament, some of the finest prophecies concerning the coming of the Messiah, came from a false prophet, a mercenary prophet, who actually wanted to accept a bribe to curse Israel. And instead, when he opened his mouth to curse, God put blessing in his mouth instead. So God used him against his will. And I believe it's possible that here God did something that surprised the woman. It wasn't the woman at work, it was God. And if the idea of Samuel being manifested in some way as to be recognizable seems difficult to appreciate, put it alongside the appearance of Moses and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration, when in some way God caused them to appear. And they were recognized, they were known. Peter says, "Let's build 3 huts, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." So it's not outside of the power of God to have used that woman on that occasion. And if I were to sum up the story, I'd simply say this. The woman who practiced spiritism, the woman was a medium, expected to contact a demon, an evil spirit, who would pretend to be Samuel. But to her amazement, God took a hand. She was terrified when Samuel was manifested, giving a message that foretold not only the death of the king and his sons, but the overturning of the kingdom into the hands of David. Now, you think of that message. Samuel spoke, and he gave a message that simply could not have come from an evil spirit. He told exactly what was going to happen the next day. He said, tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. In other words, you'll be dead. Now, I don't believe an evil spirit could have prophesied the truth in that way. Such a message could only have come from God. And if you read Samuel's words, you can't get away from the idea that this was a message from God to the distraught and worried King Saul. Mind you, although God sent the message like this, God recognized that Saul was being disobedient. If you'll turn, for example, to 1 Chronicles chapter 10. And verses 13 and 14, I think you'll find a verse that's very interesting. The first book of Chronicles, chapter 10, verses 13 and 14. So Saul died for his unfaithfulness. He was unfaithful to the Lord, in that he did not keep the command of the Lord, and also consulted a medium seeking guidance, and did not seek guidance from the Lord. Therefore the Lord slew him and turned the kingdom over to David, the son of Jesse. Now, I think we'll pause and see what dust we've managed to stir up with this. Anybody want to make a comment on it? Sister Reed is ready. I thought you might be.
Pardon? I gave my life for thee, my precious blood I shed, that thou mightst ransom be, and quicken from the dead. I gave my life for thee, what hast thou given for me? I gave my life for thee, what hast thou given for me? My Father's house of light, my glory circled throne, I left for earthly night, for wandering sad and lone. I left it all for thee, hast thou left aught for me? I left it all for thee, hast thou left aught for me? I suffered much for thee, more than thy tongue can tell, of bitterest agony to rescue thee from hell. I've borne it all for thee, what hast thou borne for me? I've borne it all for thee, what hast thou borne for me? And I have brought to thee, down from my home above, salvation full and free, my pardon and my love. I bring rich gifts to thee, what hast thou brought to me? I bring rich gifts to thee, what hast thou brought to me? In the Bible we read of a beautiful prayer, a fervent prayer sent to heaven above. It was prayed by a heart that was laden with care, and it was filled with such wonderful love. When he was praying, Jesus was praying, there in Gethsemane. Said loving Father, if you will, let this cup pass from me. No, he was thinking, grief, death would bring to his own. Deep was his sorrow, when he was praying alone. You can catch the sad tone of his voice as he said, Thy will, blessed will, not my own, must be done. As a lamb to the slaughter he soon must be led, to die as as the crucified one. When he was praying, Jesus was praying there in Gethsemane. Said loving Father, if you will, let this cup pass from me. No, he was thinking of the grief death would bring to his own. Deep was his sorrow, when he was praying alone. As he prayed there alone in such deep agony, it was a most beautiful prayer. Just to think his great heart was all broken for me, that he my great sorrow must share. When he was praying, Jesus was praying there in Gethsemane. Said loving Father, if you will, let this cup pass from me. No, he was thinking of the grief death would bring to his own. Deep was his sorrow, when he was praying alone.